Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone, to Off Time, the only in-time show where I'm not wearing the so-called $400 suit. With me today is Commander McMillan, who has agreed to do this all of August, which is. I suspect he got a blow to the head, but I'm not complaining. How
the
are you,
word
sir?
you're looking for is frightening.
Dear Lord, how are you? It's good to chat with you.
Yeah, I'm not too bad.
So you were talking about the dog. I wanted to dog stories. Yeah, I definitely want to do some dog stories, but I wanted to tell you. So we were talking earlier. YouTube. And so we do a lot of live stuff, and we've had people die on our air, and YouTube's okay with that as long as you hit the flag, adult only, and it's happened. We covered the riots. We were seconds behind Rittenhouse when he did the actual thing. We were airing that night, and we have some of the footage, and we just so it happens. I think it's happened about 3 or 4 times where we've actually seen somebody shot and killed on air as we've aired, and they're okay with that, which I'm thankful for, because it's an adult show. We have to be careful. We have to be careful of our audience. We try not to be gratuitous, but sometimes you can't control it. Then we're covering.
Don't show nudity. It's okay to show people getting killed.
God, I know.
This is America.
You have to explain, other than the Puritans, which I think everybody knows. I really want to try to understand why violence, which in at least civilization is more unnatural than sex, and yet violence is perfectly fine. It's the nudity. But that and copyright infringement. And here's why. We were covering a live car chase. Guy pulls up to a gas station, gets out of the car, and he's got the radio on, so you hear the radio blaring, and the car slams into the gas station. He runs out, the cops jump tackle him, and we're covering this live. Boom, we get a strike. And I'm sitting there going, okay, what the hell did we do? The music that was playing on the radio station as he got out of the car was copyrighted. Since it went out over our air, we got a strike for it, and we lost the appeal. We lost the appeal on that one. They're like, oh, you aired the song. I was just like, he was jumping out of the car.
If there is even the slightest bit of justice in the world, someday 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗏 is going to be hauled out, doused with kerosene, and lit afire.
Who?
𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗏.
Oh, yes. Well, he's is he now responsible? No, he's not responsible for YouTube, but he and a whole bunch of others. Although Alex Jones,
Facebook owned
YouTube. Google bought YouTube, so Google currently owns YouTube.
I am in error.
Yeah, but all of them, and it's we've had a couple of high end. We had one of the co-founders of Google on for a while, and a sweetheart of a guy. He made a joke about Australia not being real. The reason he made this joke was because he was, yeah, that was the joke.
Okay.
He said Australia didn't exist. The reason was because he was arguing with a flat earther. And the flat earther had worked himself into a pretzel, whereas basically Australia can't exist. And it's all fictitious. So he made some tongue-in-cheek, sarcastic joke about Australia not existing. YouTube suspended his account for life for racist comments. Apparently he was an anti-Australiite, I guess, for this. He is one of the co-founders of Google. Now, he knows people at Google, so he could call, and this could be fixed with a phone call, but he's just like, no, I'm not going to fix this with a phone call because I don't deserve special treatment. He did all the appeals. He got rejected on the appeals. He refuses to create an alternate account under an alternate name because that would violate YouTube services. So he just doesn't have an account on YouTube. So, and every time we aired him, I was a little nervous because I was just like, okay, he's been flagged. He thinks Australia isn't real. Like, oh dear, he's a co-founder of Google. It's a nightmare. It's a certifiable nightmare. And he's still banned. He hasn't been on. I mean, he goes on, but he can't create an account, which also meant that he could participate in our mature shows. Ones rated that we had to flag M because there was riots or whatever. He could participate in them, but he couldn't watch them because you have to have an account to watch them, and he's been banned for life.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It was. And I love the guy. Ethical as all hell that he's, but I was just like, really? So, yep. Welcome to the
bizarro world.
I know. Well, Xandring too has been. Excuse me. His Xandring had no interest, I think, in really participating on a YouTube channel. He's been on as a guest on a whole bunch of them, but now as he sort of sees how the sausage is made, he's just like, what the hell is this? I was like, and the top 10 YouTube channels, the average age of the YouTubers, I think 16 and 18, somewhere in between there, of the top 10 channels. The number one, the year we covered this, which was about 2 or 3 years ago, was a 14-year-old who made, I think, $38 million. So I'm sitting there going, my eldest is about to turn 14. So what the fuck am I doing on YouTube? I was just like, let's just tell her she needs to get a job. We'll put her on YouTube. She can do this for a couple of years. It's crazy. I don't even know.
Yeah.
Oh. So, okay. Yeah.
Insanity. This kind of stuff that, becomes popular and therefore monetizable.
Yeah.
And, somebody will say, oh, you got to see this. And I watch like 2 minutes of it. It's like, what in God's name is the appeal here? I mean, literally, I could spill ketchup on the floor and it would be more amusing than this.
Well, have you seen unboxing videos? Because the unboxing channels are and my girls loved that, and they love the Minecraft channels too. So they'll watch people playing video games. It's like, we have that game. You could play that. No, I don't want to play the game. I want to watch people playing it. I was like, okay, you do you.
Yeah. I'll be honest. I find unboxing videos in certain situations useful, because if it's a product I'm thinking of purchasing, not because of the video, but I've already made a decision that I'm interested in it. That's a way I can look at, oh, okay, so that's what this is, and I can look at the components in the box and say, okay, that might be worth purchasing, as opposed to it's obviously not something I'm going to be interested in. But,
so,
watching it religiously, no, I don't think so.
So I was, my daughter, my youngest, really wants to be on YouTube. And we're like, look, when you get a little older, maybe we work very hard that they don't wander in here while I'm streaming, stuff like that. But she's like, Daddy, I'd really like to do a game show with you. Don't you think In Time would love a game show? And she loves like Borderlands and a few of the other games. And I'm sitting there going she's like, we could play it together and I'll be your co-host. And, I want to be supportive, but on the flip side, I was like, yeah, okay. So she's like, well, it's kind of off brand. And, I was telling you earlier, we've got all the shows are basically named with time. There's overtime, nick of time, stitch in time, off time, in time, I was like, so there's no real way to do it. She goes, of course there is. We call it playtime. And I was like, fuck, I got outwitted by a 12-year-old. She had it. I was like, oh, son of a bitch. So we've done test streams, and they've gone up on Twitch, and she and I are playing video games together. And I was like, it's all test streams, but she loves it. So she wants me to build a whole interface for it and the whole 9 yards. I was like, oh, dear Lord, okay, hon, I love you.
I got myself involved.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, listen, at this point, it seems to me that 14-year-olds understand the algorithm better than I do, so I'm sure we're gonna...
probably true.
Yep. So, I had a couple questions. You and I had talked about some interesting stuff on the phone a while back. But before I get to any of that, so, do you have a thought on Okay, you're in the military, or you were in the military, and war college. You've spent your entire life studying human violence, and I always make the argument that I think sex is more natural than violence. That's probably true, but only by the slimmest of margins, because we live in a Darwinistic universe, and violence is unfortunately a part of nature. But it shouldn't be a part of civilization. And that's the whole point. My father told us before, criminal defense attorney. I said, what's the point of law? And I expected him to say justice. He said, no, it's stopping violence. That's the only reason we have laws is to stop violence. If you get justice, it's like, hey, the cherry on top. But, and as I got older, I realized he was true. So it seems to me, at least when we talk about civilization, civilization isn't going to survive without sex. It'll survive just fine. In fact, do better without violence. Why the hell do you think Americans are so? And I mean, with Clinton, it became a biggie too. It's like Clinton gets a blowjob. He got a standing ovation. Basically, for the blowjob, he got a standing ovation at the UN. And because everybody understood he was getting a really hard time back at the U.S., the French president Jacques Chirac, or whoever it was at the time, was had a mistress. Everybody knew about it, but Clinton gets a blowjob, which admittedly there were other issues involved there, but he got impeached for it. So and yes, it was for that. It was okay. He lied in a civil suit.
It wasn't even for that. Let's be honest. It was because the opposition was looking for anything they could find to embarrass a president who was otherwise fairly popular.
So, so we just got bad news, Nick. Your playtime will outperform in time. I'm well aware. And Sinister Porpoise, $2. Thank you, Sinister. Appreciate your support as always. The algorithm causes way too many societal issues, and she's got a good point there, which I'll probably also ask you about at some point. But okay, so yeah. Well, and it's really bizarre, right? Because conservatives have really typically been like, okay, sex, bad kind of, and I'm probably really grossly, but at least in this country, on the right, any kind of infidelity or anything like that, it's like, okay, until Trump comes along, right? Now Trump comes along, and they couldn't care less. What the hell was that about?
Well, I think it's even pre-Trump. There have been plenty of cases where, somebody from the right side of the aisle gets caught with his hand in the proverbial cookie jar, regardless of what it is.
Yeah.
And immediately it's like, oh no, it's a witch hunt. You're making a mountain out of a molehill, etc. But somebody on the other side does it, and it's like, oh my God, the world's coming to an end. And it's hyperbole for effect, is what it is.
Oh, and discovering. Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I think part of the reason that it feels the way it does is because of two issues having to do with the founding of the nation. Number one, the initial colonies that were set up were, in many respects, very conservative religious minorities, leaving a much more open society, coming here and establishing a governmental societal model where they impose their religious interpretation on everybody. Mm-hmm. So you get that, and in that context, sex bad, unless you're producing children. That was the mindset, and that is carried over to a large extent, the puritanical mindset. The second part is the violence, the almost endorsement of violence in our society is, again, in part because you come in and you're expropriating the lands from the people who already live here, and they're resisting that. Ergo, to protect your expropriation, violence becomes the response. Oh, there's one of them Redskins. Got to take him down.
Or
guy could be literally coming to trade with you, give you something for free. But no, he's got to be an enemy because he's other. So you combine those two, and so we have, in our societal model, kind of twisted the obvious on its head, which is natural sex is bad, but unnatural violence becomes good.
And or even ordained or endorsed in some way by God. I always get that, and they said, the hurricanes too. Like, okay, Pat Robertson comes out and everybody knows he's out there, but he's I forget how many people watch the 700 Club, but it was a huge number.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, okay, Katrina was caused by gays, and so it's like, okay, this wrath and the killing of people that happened in Katrina and the utter destruction is a natural consequence of gays and whatever else he had an objection to, and that God's wrath must necessarily be violent. And it's just like, wow, I didn't learn that in Sunday school. At least I didn't.
Yeah, well, the one I always thought, and I'm going to misattribute this. I think it was Spike Jonze back in World War II. And in one of his, I don't think it was actually a comedy routine he was doing, but somebody asked him something about the Nazis. And he said, have you ever noticed that German soldiers on their belt buckle have the German eagle surrounded by the phrase Gott mit uns, which is God is with us? And I wonder, has anybody ever asked God whose side he really wants to be on? And I think there's a lot of that, and I'm not referring specifically to the Nazis and the Germans. I'm just referring to human psychology, which is that we automatically make the assumption that whatever we believe has to be the righteous version. And anything that disagrees with us is automatically wrong thinking and must be dealt with it appropriately. And I think that's where you get the Pat Robertson type folks, particularly when you combined it with the fact that their fortune is literally based on selling that snake oil to their followers. So they can't admit that they made a mistake. Because if they do, it undermines their income. So.
Oh, well, and then prosperity gospel added to that in a real, but...
Don't get me started.
Jesus wants you to have money. He wants me to have money too, so let's get me a new jet. Then we'll talk about how you can get rich. $2, Discovering Ancient History with Pat Lowinger. Sex lasts 7 to 10 minutes. Wars can last decades. The social wars.
For the whole family.
Yeah, and for generations. Well, we do have this infatuation. I think it's that sort of Wild West attitude, the rugged individualism, the yearning for everybody walking around with a gun and all that other stuff. And I'm going to get pushback, I'm sure. But I do think there is this romanticization. I'm not even going to try. Of at least the threat of violence in some way, and that is my view, and we're a left-leaning channel, but really our principal goal is to really get behind what's going on in the news. And I took one look at Rittenhouse, and I think he was that. I think he thought he was Batman. I think he was romanticizing guns and romanticizing violence. But I don't. I stand by our reporting on that, which was that he got railroaded in the news, and a lot of people believed things that were patently false about what happened there. And the verdict, based on my understanding of what happened, and we looked into this, the verdict was the right verdict. I think he was looking for trouble. That's unfortunately not illegal. So, but I do think that that's the problem with the culture, and that's why I've got a concern with guns. What were your thoughts on
that? Cultural aspect has changed. If you go back and you look at the old Westerns from the 40s and 50s and even the early 60s, you didn't have the first response of the good guy being to shoot somebody. Usually he tried to rationally approach the situation with the villain and convince them of the error of their ways, and tried to be a good person, and only when he's pushed past a certain point does he resort to drawing the iron. At some point in about the mid-60s, that starts to change. And the first response is always draw the gun, shoot the guy. And I suspect, this is pure conjecture on my part, but I suspect that it's because that's when you start having the counterculture movement. And all the old established, white male patriarchy nonsense starts being called into question, starts being challenged. And so the response, the pushback is, you're disagreeing with me, you're challenging my religion, if you will, I'm going to kill you. That's the only response he can come up with. And admittedly, it's a huge, wild extrapolation and everything, but nonetheless, you see what I'm trying to say here, I think, which is that there is a watershed moment in our cultural history that starts us much farther down that violence is the right answer path.
Do you think some of it's like a response to fear? Just sort of maybe fear of having that patriarchy challenged, but also fear of, globalism, fear of other countries having too much influence on the U.S., fear of, terrorism.
Is that look at American response to the big international threats? You get the situation that starts us on the world stage, which is the Spanish-American War, and it's the mysterious explosion of the, I'm going to get it wrong, I think it's the Olympia in Havana Harbor. And, the immediate response isn't to, let's investigate, let's determine if this was in fact a hostile act. The immediate response, and it's encouraged by the yellow journalists because they want this to happen, is no, it's direct attack against us. We need to destroy Spain as a world power. And then you see that with, World War I and World War II, with unrestricted submarine warfare and the Zimmerman telegram in World War II with the attack on Pearl Harbor. And every war we've gotten involved with since is you take relatively minor or even artificially constructed events that are used to manipulate the nation into doing what the leadership wants at that moment, which is to create an incident to unify the public behind the leadership.
Like Gulf of Tonkin, would that qualify?
Oh, yeah, that. Yeah. I mean, that's the first one I would say is an obvious falsification of the situation. If you actually go and read the records of it, there was no Gulf of Tonkin incident. It was something fabricated by the White House and Pentagon so that we would have a justification for going in big time in Vietnam. Because up until then, it was just, small handfuls of advisors, but there was some feeling that we needed to go in and demonstrate our resolve to the commies and also make huge profits for the defense industry.
You wrote a paper on how you would have advised JFK, and I will be honest, I have forgotten what the advice was. I just remember being really impressed with it. So
well, the question that was asked, and this was when I was at War College, the question that we were supposed to write is, you are an advisor to the just elected JFK. And he asked for your input on what he should do about the situation that's emerging in Southeast Asia, specifically Vietnam. And most people, it was either, don't get involved or commit massive amounts of force and win the war outright or bomb China into the Stone Age or whatever. And my argument was side with Ho Chi Minh. And the rationale behind that was that if you go back and look at it, Ho had approached the U.S. on multiple occasions asking for their support in getting the French out of his country and establishing an independent nation of Vietnam. And the earliest one that we know of was at the 1919 Versailles Conference. He was a waiter. Ho Chi Minh was a waiter in a French restaurant at the time, but he was also a member of the party that was trying to get independence. And he went and tried to set up a meeting with the American delegation, and they turned him away because you're just a waiter. Why should we talk to you? You're nobody important. You don't represent anything, which was wrong. He did. My father knew people who had been on the OSS mission in Southeast Asia at the end of the war, World War II. And at that time, Ho had come in and asked again, please convey to your president, we really want to be friendly with the United States to establish an independent Vietnam, and we would like your assistance in encouraging the French to leave. And again, that request, which was strongly endorsed by the OSS mission there, was, discounted and thrown out because it suited our needs, because we wanted to get France to sign on to NATO and become a member of the NATO organization in Europe. A lot of good that did, because a couple of years later they dropped out of NATO. But, so political exigency was a large part of what drove that. But at the same time, my argument was, if you look at this historically, the Vietnamese want to be friends of the United States. If you look at their original Declaration of Independence and Bill of Rights, it's very, very similar to ours. It's not a direct copy, but you can see the wording is drawn largely from our documents. And the argument was, they're communists, they have to be evil. Well, so was Tito, but Tito was not in the Soviet camp. He was independent. This would have been the same thing. It's where you get a country that wants to expel a colonial power. And of course, they're going to go to the one side that is willing to provide them support in trying to obtain their independence. And that's why in many of the cases in both the Arab world, say Algeria, with the FLA, and the sub-Saharan African countries and everything, whenever they start trying to work to gain their independence, the communists made huge inroads because the Russians were willing to say, we'll give you all this goodies. And we were doing just the opposite, which is backing the occupying power. So we kind of stepped on our own feet in that regard. That was the central argument in my paper, was that no, we should be backing these people and encouraging the French to leave. We build up enormous goodwill in the country. We can probably use that goodwill as leverage to get them to turn away from communism, or at least mitigate it and become socialist as opposed to communist. But you see where I'm going. The argument that was made by one of the two moderators in the class, that he did not think that was a reasonable argument, because you also have to go back and look at domestic politics in the United States at the time. Kennedy was already being accused of being soft on communism. and
That's
for
true.
Kennedy to have done something like that. But my argument to him was not, that was not what the question that you wanted the answer to was. You said, what should we do in Southeast Asia? Not what should we do with regards to Southeast Asia that is best for your domestic platform?
And that was Clark said roughly the same thing. So I guess Clinton, and this is according to Clark's own book, was that Clinton had asked him and said, what should we do in regards to terrorism? He said, well, what I'd answer for you is X, Y, and Z, but you're caught up in these political things with the Monica Lewinsky scandal, so you really can't do that. And he's like, no, I didn't ask you what is best and most expedient for me to do. I asked you what the best thing to do there was. I'll make the decisions. I need the accurate info. And Clark gave him the accurate info, and he went ahead with Clark. At least that was my recollection from his book, if I recall.
Yeah.
So
and I think there's an argument to be made for the same kind of approach in a number of the states in the Middle East. I mean, one of the most oppressive regimes on the planet are the Saudis. And yet we're so deeply in bed with them that, we should be getting our check from them for services rendered every night. Well,
we basically are. I mean, aside from exercising, they exercise their OPEC veto power. And it's hilarious, too, because every now and then they're like, we are not in control of the Americans, and then they don't exercise their veto power. But it's like they do that once in a blue moon just to establish that they're not really in our pocket. It's like, no. And then that's why they can get away with murdering people like Khashoggi, because,
exactly.
And we don't have much of a... That's the one... I was a fan of Clinton, but I point out Clinton wasn't the one who gave us the economic boom. It was probably his predecessor, and it was the deal made by, I think it was then Defense Secretary. Oh dear Lord, was Cheney the Defense Secretary? I think I want to say it was Cheney, Defense Secretary under Bush Senior.
Yeah,
who made this great quote weapons deal with the Sauds, and it's like there's a reason all but one of the 9/11 hijackers were Saudi Arabia. They don't like us over there, and there's a very good reason. It's very hard to say that and be listened to, and it's unfortunate because it's only one extra step in the math, but it's sort of like, look, this is what we're doing, and it has consequences. The government actually despises us too, but they won't say it. Well, they kind of do say it, but they won't act on it because they need us and we give them money and we keep them in power. The people know this. The people hate their government, so they hate us because the government wouldn't survive without us. They know that. And 9/11.
And like a certain group of very religious people that we know of in this arena, they're also a big pack of hypocrites. The Sauds. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a standard joke when I was stationed in Bahrain, and every weekend, and their weekend is Friday and Saturday, Thursday evening, there was this just constant stream of cars heading across the causeway from Saudi Arabia to Bahrain over the bridge. And the joke line was, Allah cannot see across the bridge, because all of them were well-to-do Saudis, and they showed up and they went to bars and they went to drug dens and they went to the brothels, and they violated every tenet of their faith, and then Saturday evening drove home and were immediately devoutly loyal religious fanatics until the next Thursday evening.
You've studied history a great deal more than I have, and I freaking teach it, for crying out loud, and you know more about it than I do. But may speak to our education system, but at any rate, I know that is by far the norm and not the exception. Are there many, do you think, in history, leaders who, for the most part, and everybody's got some hypocrisy in them, I don't think it's possible. It's possible to avoid. We're also denial is a hell of a drug, but is there any? Do you think that there were many who? And now we talked a little bit. I want to bring this up at some point anyway, but we talked a little bit about MLK and why I have that poster back there. But he cheated on his wife quite regularly. And had other faults. Is this hypocritical? Depends on the context, I suppose. In the context of the civil rights movement, I don't know that has any impact on that. In the context of him being a reverend,
I think there's I think there's a difference.
Okay.
Yes, MLK was flawed,
mm-hmm.
but he didn't accuse other people and try to bring them down based on their hypocrisy and their flaws. He may not have admitted his own, but he didn't use it, that hypocrisy as a weapon against others. Whereas the people on the authoritarian side of the equation inevitably do that.
That's
they
interesting.
They feign how pious and wonderful they are, and when you dig literally just below the surface, you see they're probably far more corrupt and vile than even the average person, because they have more opportunity to be so.
That's interesting.
And I think that's one of the big issues, is that there has always been a sense, through most human history, I would contend, that when your status is that much higher than the average person, the rules no longer apply to you. There are a separate set of rules. The rules still apply to everybody beneath you, and you can use that to maintain order. And this is one of the reasons religion, in my opinion, is far less about faith and the search for the divine than it is a social control mechanism used by the hierarchy to maintain power.
Slight change of topic, sort of. Have you been very religious most of your life?
No.
No.
I came from a family where they didn't discourage me, and so when family friends wanted to take me to church or go to Sunday school when I was younger, it was like, oh, okay, sure. And within a fairly brief period of time, I would say within a year of that, I kind of realized that A, no, this isn't for me, and B, the hypocrisy is so thick here, you could, use it to paste things up on the wall.
Yeah, that was largely my experience.
But it's not just Christianity, because as you know, I grew up overseas. I lived in Hindu cultures, I lived in Buddhist cultures, I lived in Muslim cultures. That same sense of hypocrisy is endemic across all organized religion, I would contend.
Were there any religious beliefs that you found appealing, even if not maybe, that you would believe that you... Yeah.
I think there's nothing wrong with the search for the divine. There's nothing wrong with trying to adhere to the commonly agreed upon rules that almost every faith has. But you don't necessarily need to, eat their wafer, drink their wine, anoint your forehead with the sacred oil or whatever, in order to achieve that. It's a search from within that connects you with that, if you feel that need. There are, the one commonality is treat others as you would wish they would treat you. I see absolutely nothing to disagree with in that, and I try to, for the most part, exercise that in my life as well.
As soon as you said that, I heard like 16, 17 apologists in the back of my head, at least, saying, you see, you do believe in Jesus. That's always, Jesus invented the golden rule. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. He never even said that, to be quite honest, but okay. All right, you do you, boo. I've debated a number of apologists. We got the videos up, and I used to be much more active in counter apologetics and getting into those kinds of debates, and I still enjoy it and do it on occasion. But
just remember, the Earth is flat and is being carried on the backs of 4 elephants who are standing upon the back of the great sacred turtle flying through space.
Yeah, I did. I had a website.
All hail Terry Pratchett.
Our website, the Humanist Codex, and we had a $10,000 flat Earth challenge. And the reason I did that was because I debated some flat earthers, which I actually think is well worth doing. And the reason is because it is. It's not worth taking too seriously, but it's worth doing. And I think the reason it's worth doing is this. Do you know what Agrippa's trilemma is?
You'll have to refresh my memory. I've heard the term, but I can't remember.
It's a concept in philosophy, and it basically says that if you do a reducto, which is to say, well, how do you know that? Well, how do you know that? Well, how do you know that? If you do a reducto, and that's where a reducto ad absurdum, it's a very particular kind of reducto argument, but there are many ways to use a reducto. But if you do a reducto on any assertion, on any fact, you are eventually, if you keep doing the reducto long enough, you're going to have to hit one of 3 things. Either a brute fact, an assumption, or something where you're just saying, look, I'm just declaring this and that's what it is. Circular reasoning. I believe it because I believe something else, which, you're begging the question in some way or another. Or it's a infinite regress. All knowledge, if you keep going far back enough, rests on that. And then you get into solipsism, which I shouldn't have said because my live chat is really big into solipsism. But which technically, I guess, means I'm the one who's big into solipsism, but at any rate. So because of that, it's sort of like, at some point we don't normally do reductos that far because you hit facts that basically everybody agrees on. And what flat earthers are doing is they're basically challenging those facts and saying, okay, prove this, prove this, prove this, prove this. And if you go back down far enough, at some point you're going to hit bedrock that you can't prove. It's going to happen if you're willing to indulge long enough. So what I liked about it was having
it's the whiny 3-year-old who keeps saying why.
Yes, actually, it really is. Only they have, it's interesting when they've come up with great arguments. It's like, well, what about gravity? It's not gravity, it's buoyancy. You see where actually the air is pushing us down and all this. I mean, all these great arguments for why Aristophanes couldn't possibly have gotten his number right in 500 BC or whenever he figured out the correct size of the Earth. But what makes it interesting is learning how to argue against that kind of tactic and how to argue against a reducto that if you permit to continue, despite how reasonable they're good at making it. So it really is an exercise in dealing with very practiced BS on topics that you think should be unassailable. But anything's assailable if you're open-minded enough. So it's about learning how to shut down what sounds reasonable, but really it was a marvelous exercise, at least for me. Yeah, $2 Sinister Porpoise. We're also making jokes about recursion again. Yeah, you see, this is where, unfortunately, Commander McMillan and I, for these shows, and you said call you Lance, there's something about that just kind of, so I'm going to call you Lance for these if I can. But so Lance and I have a very strong disagreement. We try not to let it impact our friendship, but he thinks that the Earth is standing on 4 elephants, and I think it's turtles. And if you ask what that next turtle is standing on, of course, it's another turtle.
Standing on the back
that's right. The elephants are on the. That's right. Actually, that's right. I spaced it. So you see, he and I. You see, with enough communication, you can get to it, and you can overcome anything. So we are now in agreement.
Have you ever played the game Civilization 6?
Yes, I have. I played 5. I don't remember if I played 6. There's a lot of them.
One of the things you can do in that, one of the things you do in that game, if you found your own religion, is you get to assign it various characteristics. Whenever I get that chance, I always create Pratchettism, and I put the symbol as a turtle.
when the live chat can't do solipsist jokes, it's recursion jokes, and it's actually amazing. Funny things you can actually say about recursion. I wouldn't think you could get in more than one or two. Apparently, there's probably an infinite number. But Titan just said something which I think is really okay. It's postmodernism ad absurdum. Yes, and that's actually, I think Titan just phrased it. I found arguing with postmodernists to be really, really easy. And a lot of people have a difficulty with that. And I've been asked why. And it's like, because I've argued with flat earthers. And it's the same kind of reasoning. It's not to say that postmodernists are that unhinged, but it's the same kind of reasoning that absolutely everything is up for grabs. And it's skepticism just taken to an extreme that is untenable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's QAnon conspiracy theory. It's the same kind of mentality. It's the moment somebody throws the most ridiculous contention out there, you latch onto it, and it's, no, you have to prove that I'm wrong.
Yeah.
No, I don't.
Well, that is good.
I have better things to do, including cleaning lint out of my belly button.
Oh, okay. That's a good one. I'll try not to have the mental image of that one, but that's a good. I'm going to hold on to that one. Well, and that's you also get into, at least when I was doing the counter apologetics, which I still do as a hobby. Every now and then on Twitter, I was just let's see what Christian has said something really crazy today. But that's what what is it, oh God, Cy10 and all the others. Somebody in the live chat knows exactly what I'm talking about. A kind of argument that Jesus, I can't believe presuppositionalism, where it's sort of like, well, to even have logic, you have to have God. So the second that you try to make an argument for me, you've just proven God. It's called presuppositionalism. It's don't, and it's actually it's there. There are still newbies who
love God,
it.
You obviously have to have baked bread, because without baked bread, there can't be a God, right? Same kind of flawless logic.
Yeah,
you can't contend against it.
Oh, it's okay. Best counter to presuppositionalism I've ever seen. A guy by the name of 𝗦𝗫𝐆. We've had him on. He's well known in counter apologetics. 𝗦𝗫𝐆. He was debating a guy called 𝗦10 Boudinot. Now, 𝗦10 is no longer really big, but at the time he was big. He was a presupper, and one of the things that he actually argued was that really, the future is not predictable. It's completely random. There's no way to predict the future. There's no way to. You can't have logic without God, and he does this entire thing in his opening. 𝗦𝗫𝐆, and I've got the video of this. We should probably link it or do something. It's really well worth seeing. So 𝗦𝗫𝐆 opens up his laptop and says, okay, for my opening today, I've decided I'm not going to actually speak off the cuff, and I'm not going to, and actually I think it was for his counter, so I'm not going to speak off the cuff. I have drafted this, and so I'm just going to read off the laptop, if that's okay. So he does this reading off the laptop, and he gives a number of great lines. One of them, if you want to know what's wrong with Judaism, ask a Christian. Want to know what's wrong with Christianity, ask a Muslim. Want to know what's wrong with Catholics, ask a Protestant. Want to know what's wrong with Protestants, ask a Methodist. Want to know what's wrong with the First Baptist Church of Texas, ask the Second Baptist Church of Texas. Because they all disagree. Nobody has any idea. Goes, and but we can sit here and we can operate and we can Jesus, now I'm forgetting the other half of this, but he ends up coming into saying, and now 𝗦10 has argued that we can't know the future and that we can't make assumptions based on the future. The only thing we can sort of operate on is God. And for those of you who agree with him, I would like to remind you, I am reading all of these notes which I wrote 48 hours ago. He is reading his response, and he hits every single point that 𝗦10 had, but he read it and he had composed it 48 hours before his debate with 𝗦10, including the counter to and it was just, oh my God, it was probably one of the best debate moments I've almost ever seen. I've watched a lot of debates. It was that was a stroke of genius. That was a good one. And somebody will have to come up with what I forget exactly how and why the future thing is important. I thank God I don't remember most of Saiten's arguments with him. And oh dear Lord! So he actually tried to get me to, and this was an interesting one because I've spoken with him a few times, and he asked me to take a polygraph. He said anybody would take a polygraph. I said sure, I'll take a polygraph, and it was on do I believe in God or not. And I said, yeah, I'll take a polygraph because he believes in Romans 12. Everybody believes in God. Absolutely, everybody knows that God exists, and atheists are just, yeah. Well, and it makes it very difficult to have a discussion with him because he uses that as an out to a whole bunch of arguments, and he refuses to accept that atheists actually exist. So I said, oh, yeah, I'll take a polygraph. And then he ended up putting all sorts of conditions on it. And one of the things, too, is, and this is an interesting one. You might have an interesting, he had suggested, too, that I would, while not lying, that I would generate a reflexive response if I said, and I forget what it was, but something about how, what is it? Not only is there no God, but some other essentially strong blasphemy. And the truth is, he's right. And I admitted that, and I said, well, yeah, I probably would. I said, but there's a reason. I was a believer for the first 24 years of my life. And I find it interesting that psychologically I still sometimes get it's like you're not really supposed to say the things that you're saying, and I can get triggered myself. Now, they've given polygraphs to people who grew up in secular communities, Scandinavian communities, where non-belief was a thing, and they don't get triggered that way. But what's really interesting is, and Christopher Hitchens had said this, Christopher Hitchens said, I don't understand people who've lost their faith and they're sad. They say it's like missing a limb, because I don't understand that. I can't possibly fathom that. And I was like, yeah, that's me. I really do miss my faith. And it's funny because I talk to theists all the time, and they're like, well, you just wish there was no God, you hate God. And I was like, you have no idea how much I actually wish this was true, and how much I wish that there was and I get in trouble with atheists all the time because they're like, well, why would you want a celestial prison and all this other stuff? I was like, oh, you don't understand religion if you think that's what it is. Everybody believes in a God that supports them personally. If you have a problem with the Catholic God for whatever reason, or if the Catholic God would have a problem with who you are, you become Protestant, or you become something. People find the God that's ideal for them, and that's what they believe in. If I could do that, I'd find a God that's roughly Christian, but acknowledges my flaws, and I'd still get into heaven because in the end I always try to be good, and that's what really matters, and all this other stuff. So I'd be thrilled with it, and that's the God I'd believe in, and that's the God everybody believes in, is the God that So it's like, why wouldn't you want that? So anyways, I that's one for me.
The thing about it that always irritates me is that when they say, "Do you believe in God?" It's not, do you believe in God that they're asking. It's, do you believe in my version of God? If it was a generic question that was, do you believe in the divine, be it Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, what have you, that's one thing, but that's not what they mean when they say it. What they're saying is, do you believe in my interpretation of what God is? And if you don't, then you're wrong or you're lying. That's the problem.
Well, and how often is that at the end of a sword, whether it's a real sword or an economic sword, whatever it is?
Even a figurative sword is all it needs to be. It's an implied threat.
Yep. Well, I have a friend who sort of recently deconverted. They recently left religion, and they've been ostracized by their family. Their family basically thinks that the devil's been whispering in their ear, and now they're hedonists who are doing drugs, having sex. There's nothing could be further from the truth. These are really great people, but they've just decided they don't. But their family is now, and the amount of hatred that they have towards religion, which I completely get, because you feel like you've been lied to your whole life. You were sold a bag of goods, including but not limited to, you have an immortal soul. That is an actual balance in the scales, and there's going to be, and you feel like you've been betrayed, even if your family was lied to as well. They just still believe the lie. They're not wishing ill or harm on you. It's hard for me to imagine, and my guess is you can come up with something, but for me, it's hard to imagine very many things that are more destructive than organized religion, either it being in it or coming out of it and looking at it at the other side. It's terribly destructive.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was,
I agree.
John Payne had said, oh dear Lord, I don't know. We have all these. The founding fathers loved God and all this other stuff. And I was just like, yeah, that's why Thomas Jefferson rewrote or pulled out all the miracles, Jesus miracles from the Bible. You can actually get the Jefferson Bible. It's just Jesus with none of the miracles. Half of them were deists, but that's an argument for another time. Discovering Ancient History with Pat Lowinger, $2. I will teach you how to beat the box. No problem.
Yeah, he will. He will.
So, oh dear Lord. Well, what I think we're going to do, I'm going to start wrapping it up. There's definitely, we've had a number of discussions on some other topics that I'd love to revisit. But thank you so much for having this chat with us, and it was delightful. And you'll be back next week, same time, and we'll just sort of continue where it left off. Thank you all for joining us. We'll be doing overtime. There's, oh dear Lord. The only other one I forgot I wanted to bring this up. We were talking about the people the hypocrites who are doing this. Oh, Alex Jones, one of the very few times they really. Oh, I don't know if you saw any of that court testimony, but
I'm sure there were a lot more contagious diseases somewhere, but I can't think of any offhand.
And he's finally admitted Sandy Hook was real, and he's just like, well, I spoke with the parents, and now I know, and yeah, it was probably a bad idea to say it was fake. And, I mean, even the Pizzagate, it's like the guy came in and shoots up the pizza joint, and didn't hurt anybody, and Alex Jones didn't start that theory, but Jesus, and how much money did he make? He's going to lose it all.
That's the key thing. These are people who, whatever makes them wealthy is justified. It doesn't matter who gets hurt. As long as they're making a profit, it's good. That's the problem. It's a personal centric version of the universe.
Is that innate, do you think, or do you think that that's something people learn, or?
I think it's a combination. I think that most people, to some extent, have those sensibilities resident within them, but they understand that it's not a good thing, and they keep it under control. But I think that people like Alex, it really doesn't matter anymore. To them, I am literally the center of the universe. And when I pass on, the universe effectively ceases to exist. So what does it matter what I do as long as it makes me happier? And that entire political movement embodied by him, others like him, by the orange shit given, all of that crowd. That's the problem. They have raised greed to divinity status.
Right. I'm going to write that one down, because I don't know if you know, I wrote a book that was the Midwest Book Review hailed as the definitive rebuttal to Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. And there was a lot that she she said that I very strongly agree with. Actually, I think she only made one or two key mistakes, but they're foundational. Everything. If she hadn't made those mistakes, and there were mistakes about basic assumptions about human morality, and if she hadn't made those mistakes, her system would work beautifully, exactly the way she said. But then again, so would Marxism. So it's but. Yeah, we'll have to have that discussion because that's all right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you to the live chat for joining us. We will have Commander McMillan back on next week, and we'll just pick it up. And we got him all month if he can tolerate it. It's love having him on to discuss these things. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be doing an overtime to cover the vast majority of news that's been going on over the last week. You can also find it on our Discord, so come join us on the Discord, and we stay up to date with current events, and you can actually have some say on how the show is. We're basically collectively put together. People come on, they talk about the stories. We workshop what we're going to do on the Discord, and then we air it here. So hope you guys will join us, and thank you all for coming. Let me do one other little final check here and just make sure. Yep, well, that's all set. All right. So, Xandring and I have one or two other things that we've been workshopping that we're looking forward to.
Well, no, I'm Xandring according to this picture.
Oh dear Lord! And not only according to the picture, according to the title. And I screwed that. Yeah. I outwitted myself on that one. We used to have we've had several different producers for the show, and they've all done marvelous jobs. But for one reason or another, we went separate ways with each of those producers. So I've been producing on my own for a while, and I've been trying to simplify it so that I can host and produce, which is usually a reasonably poor idea. But we have production demands that make it rather technical. You have to know what you're doing to be able to produce, and we're cutting in live technical when we're bringing in other feeds and 6 streams simultaneously. You need to know what you're doing. So one of the things I've done is whenever the show goes to the standing by screen where we do all our staging, you've seen that before. You can see all the cameras, you can see the live chat, you can sort of see everything. When it goes to that, it resets all of the text for all of the things. And since Xandring's the co-host, his name automatically. So I put your name in when we go to but I did it before standing by. We go to standing by, and because I think I'm so clever and over-engineered the living daylights out of this, his name gets put right back in. So, Xandring, thank you so much for joining us. I'm
glad to have been here. You should have Lance on sometime.
We should. Well, to tell you the truth, at some point we'll have I know Xandring's would love to chat with you. I'm sure Mowdy would too. So you're doing off time with Lance? Are you the only one who hosts off time, or can I come in? It's like, we'll get it sorted. We're gonna do a couple of shows. We'll see. But yep. All right. Well, thank you again. Yeah, I have a few shows planned with Xandring here, but we'll talk about it later, and we'll catch up on the Discord. Thank you guys so much, and thank you, Lance, and we'll catch up with you next week.
Take care.